G'day everybody, what we're going to look at this afternoon is how to remove the valve body from a ZF 5HP 19 transmission. Before you start, you would need to drain the transmission of oil. We've got the oil drain plug here, so remove that, allow all the oil to drain out. Put the plug back in, and then what we're going to do is remove all of the bolts around the outside of the pan. Takes a fair bit of time. Best way to do this, I've found when I've done this under my car at home, is to use an electric screwdriver with your Torx bit attached, and that'll make fairly light work of it. Be aware that when you remove this, there's still going to be a whole bunch of oil left in it, probably about half a litre or so. So my advice to you is to have maybe a floor jack or something supporting this so it can hold it and you can lower it down level and you don't end up with oil everywhere. Right, I've already removed most of these bolts just to save some time, so I'll just remove these last couple. And once we pull off the pan, you'll notice that there isn't a gasket here on a car. Obviously there would be one, I've removed that already. And the oil pan itself, you can see that I've already cleaned this one up. It would be filthy and full of oil. If it's the first time you've done it in a while, these magnets here would also be covered in a whole bunch of gums. That's perfectly normal. It just collects the debris from the clutches and wear and tear on your transmission, so it doesn't actually end up going back through it again. So you would need to remove these magnets, clean them all up, give everything a perfectly good clean so it's good to go when you install it back again. Now we're going to remove the filter, which is this piece here. There are two bolts, one at the back and one at the front. What we're going to do is just loosen a couple of turns the one at the back, remove the one at the front, and then what I'm going to do is just put my hand underneath here and just gently pull that out. Now be aware that when you do this, that the whole valve body and the oil pump, etc., is full of oil, and a whole bunch of oil is just going to flow out. So have a pan underneath it ready for that, so you don't get covered in oil. And once it's out, you can just slot that straight out. On the underside of the filter, you can see the big orange O-ring that seals it. I've had the case back home on my car. When I pulled this out, this was actually stuck still inside the valve body. You'll need to remove that if you're just doing a filter change. If you're actually taking out the valve body, I just leave it in there and you can pull it out later on much more easily when you start to dismantle the valve body. But if that is still in there and you're just doing a filter change, then you'll need some sort of a pick tool to pull that out. Be really careful. This is all aluminium. You do not want to scratch the inside of here. It's really important that this has a really good seal for getting the oil getting sucked up here. What you absolutely don't want is, you know, a bit of leakage here and it actually sucking up air inside the transmission valve body. That would be extra bad. Now what we're going to do is remove the valve body. The first thing we're going to do that is remove the electrical connections. The first one I'm going to do is the input speed sensor, which is this one here. There are a couple of different variations on this. There's one where there's a clip like this one, which you can just disconnect, and this wire goes around, and as you'll see later on when I remove the valve body, you'll see that's connected to the actual casing of the transmission. There's another variation of this where there isn't a clip, and this actually bolts to the underside of the valve body, so you may or may not have to disconnect this clip. To disconnect it, leave it attached here to these lugs on the valve body, get a pick tool, stick it inside this little window and push and wiggle here, and that will just pop straight out. Once that's out, then you can remove that from those lugs and just move it to the side. The next thing we're going to remove is the output speed sensor. So we're just going to remove the two Torx bolts here. Now I must point out that you can remove the valve body with the transmission either in or out of the car, which is kind of nice that you don't have to remove the transmission if you actually want to do work on the valve body. The next thing we're going to disconnect is the large plug on the outside of the transmission. Obviously you would need to rotate and pull off the plug here. Now what we're going to do is actually push this inside, because that's actually connected to all these wires here. So there's actually a little lug on this clip that stops it from being able to pull straight out, so I need to push it like that and then rotate, and it'll just push. I'll pull straight out. Now I'm just going to push that in and then just gently pull that up and over the top like that. Now what I'm going to do is remove the bolts that actually hold the valve body to the transmission casing. They all take T27 Torx bolt or Torx socket, but they have different sized heads. Okay, the big ones are the ones that you want to remove. You can see that I've already removed a whole bunch of these just to save a lot of time. There are lots and lots. I think there's about 14 in total. There's a few at the back, but a whole lot at the front. The best way I found, because this has obviously all been cleaned up, but when you first pull this out, everything's going to be covered in oil and it's a bit difficult to work out which is which. The best way I found was just to get, I've used an 11mm socket. It won't go over the small one, over the big ones, but it will go over the small ones. We want to remove all the big ones. When we remove all of these, there are actually a couple of different sizes. I'll just pull this one out here to show you. There's that one there, and here's one I pulled out previously. As you can see, there are small and large ones. It's the large ones that I actually want to leave a couple of them in, so I'm going to remove every single one of them, of the large headed ones, but what I'm going to do is actually just leave one of the large headed ones at the front here, and also one here at the back. The reason I'm going to do this, you don't need to do this if the transmission is out of the car like this, but if it is in the car, this is quite heavy. When you start removing all these bolts, this is actually connected to two tubes underneath here, and it's jammed in there, so what's going to happen is this is going to try and swing that way and possibly break things, which you don't want to do. So my advice to you is just to have these two bolts in there, a couple of threads, and then once everything else is out, what you can easily do is just get your fingers underneath here and pull, and that will just pop it out of those two tubes with the O-rings at the top. Now once there, it'll actually just be sitting on these two bolts, which is fine. My advice to you then, if it's in the car and it's upside down compared to this, is get a floor jack, sit it underneath here, remove those last two bolts, and then just gently lower it down. And now we're just going to remove the entire valve body with all those electrical connections still attached. There's the underside of it. You can see the machined faces where it actually bolts down to the faces here on the transmission case itself. Now one of those two tubes actually came with the valve body, no problems with that, we're just going to put that back in. If you don't need to actually disassemble a transmission, leave these in place, because especially this one here, which is the outlet from the pump, this will actually break when you pull it out, so you'll have to replace it. So if you're only doing work on the valve body, then just leave those in, and then we're just going to put it straight on top of that when we assemble everything together. Also you can see here is the input speed sensor. If you need to remove that, pretty simple process of just disconnecting that one bolt and then just pulling that straight out. Okay then, I hope this helps.